Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. Now, I was going to do a video about some sort of street incident that occurred in Vancouver. Some guy in a car was trying to get a woman to get in his car, probably thought he was a prostitute. And as a consequence, there is a locally forming mob of white knight male feminist vigilantes who want to go save a hoe or something. And I was going to do a video talking about beware of white knights because they're dangerous. And they are, but I'm going to talk about something else. We can return to the white knight story if you guys are interested in a follow-up video. Seattle, like many other cities under hyper-progressive mayors, has been doing ridiculous things with their policing. And you've likely heard about this from Tim Pool or other online sources, that they have hired a guy who is a former pimp to be some sort of street safety czar. Which is absurd enough by itself. One of the things, and that's probably what most of the stories are focusing on as far as I can tell. One of the things, though, that I have seen that nobody seems to be focusing on is the use of the phrase trauma-informed as a theoretical model for policing and investigation and stuff that's being enacted in Seattle and in many other places. And I want to draw your attention to the phrase trauma-informed, because it sounds like some sort of new age, we care about the victim or something like that, model for investigation or theory of laying charges and so on. And it is, but it's also extremely dangerous. Now, before I get into trauma-informed, I'm going to mention something that happened in the 80s because it's going to be relevant. In the 1980s, the model of news delivery was rapidly changing from sort of the 6 o'clock news with Walter Cronkite, which was a set time of the day when there would be like a 1-hour news show. And in the 1980s, cable news emerged as a feature, as a format of news delivery, which allowed for like a 12 or a 24-hour news cycle. So they suddenly had much more airtime to fill up with news, which meant that they had to sensationalize much more trivial things, and in some cases, I wouldn't say purposefully fabricate, but because the style of delivery of news changed, the repetition of low incident, low occurrence events on a longer news delivery cycle gave the impression to the public that there was a sudden jump in a certain type of sensational, shocking crime. And in particular, one of these sensational, shocking crimes was child mistreatment or child abduction. And so the whole of North America suddenly started to think that there was like a pervasive culture of child abduction and child predation and satanic child abuse and all this stuff. And there was a giant scandal that emerged from this. Now, obviously child abuse and child abduction does occur, but it occurs at a very low rate. And in spite of the current I would say online hysterics about the Hollywood pedophile ring where they're harvesting adrenochrome from children's brains or something like that. That's too wacky for me to buy into. But in the 80s, because the news cycle changed, they had to start putting in more sensational stuff that previously had never been reported on the news because we only had a 1-hour news segment, the Walter Cronkite style. And so everybody began to get the impression that there was this pervasive culture of child mistreatment, and there was a hysteria that formed where people believed there was a rash of satanic child abuse cults operating out of daycares. And the psychological world created a new diagnosis, which was, they called it a late onset female pedophile or female child sex abuser. And they started accusing middle-aged women who ran daycares of abusing and molesting and harming children, which wasn't happening. or at least it wasn't happening to any more greater degree than it ever happened, which is to say not very much at all. And in fact, there is no such thing as a late in life onset of pedophilia in middle-aged women. That's not a thing. But this hysteria was present, and so a bunch of like grief and trauma assisting helper professions emerged, and one of them was memory regression, where you would have these people who styled themselves as child therapists who would dig up repressed memories in both children who thought they'd been abused or had been convinced that they'd been abused, and adults who, for reasons of wanting to seek attention or reasons of being otherwise mentally unbalanced, would believe that they had been in their previous life as a child abused. And so we had these guided memory recovery experts producing testimony from both adults and children that they'd been ritually, satanically, sexually abused as children. And it was all hysteria. It was all fabrication of memory through assisting of the psychologist. And, this was debunked and it went away, but a lot of lives were ruined. A lot of people were accused, and families were destroyed. And so digging up these repressed memories, which was never a thing, it was memories being fabricated in the session. And the people for whom these memories were fabricated believed it, because how can you tell if a memory is real or not? And people's lives were ruined. People went to jail who were completely innocent. Suppressed memory recovery was I wouldn't say a scam, was a hoax, was false, was a public hysteria. Well, let's go back to the phrase I mentioned. The phrase is the trauma-informed model. This is a new model of examining witness evidence in a sex assault case or a sexual abuse case or a domestic abuse case, when the abuse victim, when the claimant is a female. And what they're doing is basically they've rehashed the debunked methodology of recovered memory syndrome or suppressed memory syndrome. They've just recategorized it, and they've created some new terminology for the exact same things, and repackaging it now as the trauma-informed model of investigation. And some of the things that are the principles of this is in cross-examination of a witness. In conventional policing, when you cross-examine a witness, you have them go through their story multiple times from multiple angles over a period of time, and you look for wild inconsistencies in that story as a way of figuring out like what really happened here. And some of that is your memory, a person's memory in a traumatic event is scattered and fragmentary and all jumbled up and mixed up. But we also know that as you recycle and go through a memory over and over and over, every time you go through a memory and recount it, you actually rewrite that memory a little bit. The trauma-informed model takes the opposite view of conventional police investigation, whereas inconsistencies and contradictions in a story have conventionally been viewed as indication of the story's not being on the level, being either false or mistaken, or in other ways not corresponding to reality. The trauma-informed model, all of the conventional signals in a testimony that normal police investigation would say, okay, this is false, this is not a case, this is a thing that either didn't happen or it happened and this person is misunderstanding what was going on, so maybe they're really upset or maybe they're telling me a funny story. Well, the trauma-informed model takes all those inconsistencies that used to indicate falsehood and says they all indicate truth. So an accuser with a really hinky, doesn't hold together story, in the trauma-informed model, the more hinky and doesn't hold together the story is, the more it is believed in the trauma-informed model. Beware, watch out for the trauma-informed model. Watch out for that phrase, because it indicates a reversal of the normal methodology of investigation, whereas things that used to indicate falsehood are now being treated as indications of veracity and truth. And this is, of course, all arrows always point to guilt. All arrows always point to guilt. We will always find guilt no matter what, especially when the plaintiff is female and the accused person is male. Beware, watch out, watch for this happening in the police department of your city, in the police of your state or your province. Because it's a debunked methodology. It's a rehashing of the recovered memory syndrome that was debunked in the late 1980s, that sent a whole lot of innocent people to jail, and is now going to send a whole lot more innocent people to jail and ruin a whole lot more people's lives. Hopefully this wasn't too rambly, but I was working with a script. Thanks very much for watching, and for those of you helping to support this channel, which is really makes me happy, even though YouTube is slowly shutting my channel down and throttling the notifications. You guys helping support the channel fill me with delight. So thanks for supporting on Subscribestar and Patreon, and thanks for watching, and have a lovely, lovely day.